Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I've got a complaint, मुझे Palestine scarf नहीं दिया गया. I'm still waiting for one. Anyway. So, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me, especially Professor Azimuddin. He's always been very kind, and it's always a pleasure to meet him. And it's been a pleasure to come here and to see this lovely exhibition. It's the first time I've been here, and hopefully I shall come back again. Thank you. So I think I can move on. Let me get that on and then we'll so that's better. Okay. So move मैंने करना है. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about carcinoma of unknown primary. Now this used to be a death sentence at one time. एक दफ़ा आपको metastatic widespread carcinoma मिले, so it was, basically that was the end of the story for the patient. But now with advances in therapy and in imaging, we are better able to identify these patients and to manage them as well. So the definition of carcinoma of unknown primary or occult primary tumor is a histologically confirmed metastatic tumor where a standard diagnostic workup, and that's important, is unable to identify the primary site. And we take out things like sarcomas, lymphomas, and melanomas are not included in this. These patients usually present clinically with things like palpable masses, pain, dyspnea. Sometimes they have routine imaging tests, and you will find out, for example, multiple nodules on a chest X-ray, or a patient has a lumbar spine X-ray and you find a destructive lesion, or the patient does an ultrasound for abdominal pain or whatever, and you find things like multiple liver masses. And there is no generalized consensus so far on how much diagnostic workup is sufficient before you label these as carcinoma of unknown primary. So the most common primaries that we see in meta-analysis of these patients are lung in around 27%, pancreas in about 24%, and liver or bile duct, kidneys, colorectal, etc., etc. Okay? And the point is to identify those subsets of patients out of all of these who have favorable clinical features and for whom some form of therapy may be available, either immunotherapy or radiation or whatever. So the diagnostic approach is to identify those patients who are possibly going to be able to benefit from treatment. So the overall diagnostic approach can be summarized. You do the initial evaluation, you find out there's a tumor, you do a local staging exam, and I'll talk about that. You biopsy the lesion, and once you confirm that histologically that the lesions are metastatic, then you identify the primary if possible, and then based upon your findings and on your possible detection of a primary or thoughts about a primary, you select additional further workup, and this will be able to guide the oncologist to provide focused immunochemistry or gene profiling, and they may be able to provide personalized targeted therapy to the patient. So what does the oncologist want to know? Of course, the first thing he wants to know, what is the primary tumor site? The radiologist, by being familiar with the finding of primary tumors and the pattern of metastatic disease, may sometimes be able to identify the primary tumor. Then the oncologist obviously wants to know where is the best site to biopsy. So again, if we know the primary metastatic pattern of primary tumors, we are able to suggest that which is out of all of the lesions, which is the most appropriate lesion to biopsy. And similarly, the oncologist wants to know into which subset my patient can be classified. So the radiologist can provide, again, the best site and diagnostic method of providing this information. And again, depending on the final tumor, what is the next diagnostic step? So for example, if the oncologist, radiologist suspects that this is a neuroendocrine tumor, you may recommend an octreotide scan. If you think it's a prostate primary, maybe you will recommend a MR or a PSMA PET. And finally, at the end, the radiologist and the oncologist need to get together and to decide are the results of the imaging, the pathology, and all the other laboratory tests concordant, and can we identify a possible primary tumor which we can provide appropriate therapy for. And in the end, once the treatment is started, we also need to get together and to see if the patient is actually responding to that treatment as well. And you need to be familiar with the various response criteria and how tumors respond, and false positive, false negative, whatever. So the initial minimal standard workup is a thorough physical exam, including the head and neck, rectal, pelvis, breast exams, basic blood and biochemical surveys, fecal cord blood testing, CT of the chest, abdomen, pelvis, and obviously histology of the biopsy sample. And the goal is to identify tumor with specific lineages such as lymphoma, sarcoma, melanoma, because then these patients are amenable to distinct therapies. In all patients with unknown primary, tissue diagnosis is mandatory, so radiologists should be able to identify the lesion A, which is most amenable for biopsy, or the one that can be biopsied in the most safe and least invasive method. And if the radiologist can't biopsy it, at least we should be able to identify to our surgical colleagues or gastroenterologists that what is the best site and method of obtaining tissue diagnosis. So in the initial radiological assessment, the workhorse of this is contrast enhanced CT of the chest, abdomen, and pelvis. You will be able to search for the primary tumor, clearly identify the extent of disease, and be able to select the amenable biopsy sites. And I'll talk about the second point later, that some patients, based on the initial CT, may require further imaging. The routine use of mammography in all patients, women with unknown primary, is controversial. And even though mammography is a quick and non-invasive test, mammography per se has a relatively low detection of breast cancer. So the NCCN guidelines do not recommend mammography routinely to patients with unknown metastatic disease, unless of course there are specific clinical or pathological features which suggest that this is breast cancer. So if patients have axillary or supraclavicular nodes, which is proven to be adenocarcinoma and metastases, then they may have, and mammography is non-diagnostic, then these patients should have breast MR. A little bit about FDG PET. FDG PET has been increasing, as one of the indications for management of patients with the carcinoma of unknown primary. It has a greater sensitivity, detects more primary sites up to 40% than either CT or MR, which are around 20 to 27%. But there are limitations to PET-CT. While it will detect many more occult primary tumors, but in practice, these patients have such extensive disease that it is not always possible to distinguish the primary site from the metastases. And sometimes, of course, you can get physiological activity within structures as the esophagus or colon, which make distinction of primary tumor difficult. And of course, you can have false positives with a lot of inflammatory lesions. So the largest body of evidence for PET-CT is in patients with head and neck cancer who present with cervical adenopathy. I will discuss a little bit about this later, but there's an excellent presentation with Dr. Masih coming up later, so I won't talk a lot about this. So here's a case. This was a 61-year-old patient who presented with skin nodules. This was biopsied, came back as adenocarcinoma, so PET-CT was done. And as you can see, there's disease everywhere. There's disease in the liver, there's disease in the lungs, and there's disease on the skins as well. So a skin nodule was biopsied and a CT-guided biopsy of one of the dominant lung nodules was performed. The skin nodule showed metastatic adenocarcinoma. The immunohistochemistry, a number of stains were positive, but this profile was not really specific for any primary site. So the primary lung biopsy, however, when that came back, the finding of CK7 positive, CK20 negative, and TTF1 positive is highly specific for adenocarcinoma of the lungs. So it's important to remember that sometimes metastatic foci can have different patterns of protein expression and histology from the primary site, and it is always, it highlights the importance of finding the primary site and identifying that, because that will be able to better guide your treatment. Which brings me on nicely to tumor markers. A wide panel of tumor markers is now used in these patients. They can help us to narrow the differential diagnosis, and as radiologists, we should be aware of the major tumor markers because they will help us in guiding our search for a primary tumor. So for example, a young man with raised beta-HCG and AFP levels might have a germ cell tumor, CA125 in women with primary peritoneal carcinomatosis, may have an ovarian tumor, CA15-3 in patients with lymph node metastases in the axilla, and obviously PSA in men with blastic bone metastases. And the combination of CA19-9 and CA125 is very helpful in sort of pointing us towards gynecological and pancreatobiliary tumors. But remember, any metastatic disease can give you high levels of these tumors, so it's not 100% accurate. So in the final part of the talk, I'll look at the radiological patterns of carcinoma of unknown primary and to see if whether patterns of metastatic disease can help us to identify a possible primary tumor. So I'll discuss 7 subsets of patients, those with node metastases, which may be breast cancer, what you should do next, mammography, breast cancer, ER/PR receptors, etc., cervical node metastases, inguinal nodes, peritoneal carcinomatosis. Anyway, we'll go through these and you can look at the chart and go back and refer to what is needed for all of these patients. So metastatic axillary carcinoma, adenocarcinoma in these nodes is a uniquely favorable subset. It is usually amenable to treatment, and the primary diagnosis in the mind should be occult breast cancer, and further evaluation should be targeted towards finding the breast cancer. If mammography or breast cancer after ultrasound cannot find a breast mass, then the next step to do is a dynamic contrast enhanced MRI. Here's a case in point, a patient with a large, do we have a pointer? Irregular enhancing foci in the breast, and based on the MR, the ultrasound was reviewed. You can see the lymph node as well. The MR was reviewed. There was a vague area of parenchymal asymmetry. This was biopsied, and this came back as IDC or non-specific carcinoma, as they call it now. Metastatic cervical lymph nodes are will typically have a upper or mid-neck squamous cell carcinoma, and these patients should be offered FDG PET, and even if there is no primary identified tumor on ENT examination. And here's a case in point, patient with CT, there were lymph nodes, they were enlarged tonsils, but no definite primary was found. When the PET was done, apart from the lymph nodes, there was asymmetric uptake in the left tonsil. This was biopsied, and this turned out to be the primary tumor. Inguinal nodes is a special subset. These are usually related to, metastatic inguinal nodes are usually related to bowel, typically the anal canal distal to the dentate line. Vulva or cervix cancer, vulva especially, can sometimes give you metastatic nodes. Bladder and prostate, less likely but also possible, and of course, you can have musculoskeletal or skin tumors of the lower limb, but those should be clinically apparent. MR is the modality of choice for assessing these patients. Here's a case in point again, a patient with a large lymph node in the right axilla. You can ignore the hernia. So this was biopsied, came back positive for tumor, and there's actually a primary tumor present here. I don't know if anyone spots it or not. So there was a transitional cell lesion in the bladder, which on review of images was detected and was positive on cystoscopy. This is another important subset of patients which we frequently see in our clinical practice. These patients present usually with abdominal distension due to ascites, mostly females, and most of them will be due to peritoneal dissemination of a gynecological primary, but you can also have primary peritoneal carcinomatosis, All of them will usually have a markedly elevated CA125 level, but this is a non-specific test and can be seen in any extensive metastatic disease. The point of imaging is A, to identify a possible primary, and to B, obtain a tissue sample for histological examination. And this was a patient again who presented with fever and weight loss. And you can see there is extensive omental disease with stranding and nodularity throughout the abdomen. There was no ascites. There was no obvious adnexal mass. So the patient was referred for a laparoscopic biopsy of the omentum, which came back positive, and she was treated along the lines of ovarian carcinoma. Another variety of peritoneal disease is pseudomyxoma peritonei. This is essentially related to mucinous carcinomas. And when you see this pattern of disease, where you see a dense ascitic looking fluid, which is causing scalloping of organs, such as you see along the liver surface, and to a lesser extent along the spine, you should think about mucin secreting tumors, most probably of GI origin, and the commonest organ is usually the appendix. So this pattern of disease should guide you towards a mucin GI tumor rather than an ovarian tumor. Another specific subset is midline tumors in young men. These are usually in the mediastinal or peritoneal areas, and they should be suspected of having an extragonadal germ cell tumor. And the radiological impression on CT is important because this will be able to guide the therapy and the testing. Differential is wide, of course, may include any of number of these structures, including lymphoma, sarcoma, even retroperitoneal fibrosis, and of course TB. So here's the case in point. This was a 38-year-old man who presented with a large mass in the upper abdomen and in the mediastinum, extensively necrotic. Scrotal ultrasound was normal. Pathology just showed poorly differentiated carcinoma, but his serum beta-HCG levels and his alpha-fetoprotein levels were indicated. So based on the imaging finding, germ cell tumor was suggested, the tests were done, and this patient was treated on the lines of germ cell tumor, and this is a post-therapy scan showing significant reduction of the size of the tumor. So what you think and what tests you order may help to guide the therapy. Neuroendocrine tumors are a special subset. They're a wide spectrum of disease. They're derived from embryonic neural crest cells, may come from the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal medulla, and the GI tract or the pancreas. So these are the typical immunohistochemistry tests that you do on these, and obviously octreotide scanning is highly sensitive and specific for these patients. And here's the case in point. There's a patient who presented with multiple focal liver lesions. There was peripheral enhancement on the initial arterial phase of the study. So the question was, is this atypical HCC? Is this neuroendocrine tumor? Can anyone see a primary tumor? Okay. So this patient was referred to us for biopsy. So we looked at the scans. When you're reviewing the scans, we found a small enhancing lesion in the bowel, which you can see on the coronal images as well. So this was a jejunal neuroendocrine primary with liver metastases. So this pattern of disease should, you should have a look at the GI tract, you should have a look at the pancreas, and you should try to find a possible primary lesion. Finally, sclerotic bone mets, very common presentation. Multiple sclerotic lesions in the spine, in the pelvis, and in the pubic bones. Another different patient with metastatic lesions within the lumbar cord. So the most common cause for these is prostate cancer, obviously in male patients. These patients will get a PSA scan and may need an MR of the pelvis to find the primary tumor. Breasts may be sclerotic but are usually mixed. Transitional cell carcinoma is another common cause of sclerotic mets. Hodgkin's lymphoma is the classic ivory vertebra which we read about in textbooks. Lung cancer, adenocarcinomas may give you sclerotic mets. Squamous cell usually gives you lytic mets. And thyroid, while we typically read about expansile lytic lesions in thyroid cancer, remember medullary carcinoma of the thyroid may give you sclerotic bone metastases. And these are two cases in PINE. This is a patient with Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple sclerotic lesions throughout the skeleton. And this was a patient with a solitary hyperdense vertebra. And this is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This is primary bone lymphoma. So this may present, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, primary bone may present with a sclerotic lesion as well. So in conclusion, the diagnosis and management of patients with carcinoma of unknown primary has evolved, and the development of individualized therapy, including targeted therapeutic agents with or without conventional chemotherapy, has dramatically improved the survival of these patients. And because of this, we need to identify the site of primary disease when possible. And radiologists, together with oncologists and pathologists, must adopt a multidisciplinary approach to diagnose these patients and to provide optimized care for them. And with modern imaging and by familiarity of the radiological patterns of disease, we may frequently identify the primary focus and may help to guide the targeted therapy. Thank you.